So again, good evening. It's good to be back. I have two readings tonight. One is from one of the Gospels, and it's a challenging reading, and then Yogananda's commentary on it. But before I get into the readings, let me put it in a context. Since I've been back, well, one of the unusual blessings in India, the other thing that happened was my phone was stolen. And it actually ended up being a good thing, because then I didn't watch the news, I didn't tune into anything. I did use somebody's phone to call Vicky every night, but I was kind of cut off from the world. And I really appreciated being cut off from the world. But when I got home, I got a number of emails from people and text messages concerned about the state of the world and people being in anxiety. So I'm going to try to address that tonight in a wise and loving way. But I want to put the readings, particularly the one from the Gospel, again, it's quite challenging, in a context. Again, I've said this numerous times, nothing in the world catches God off guard. God's not surprised by anything. And although God doesn't make things happen per se, we have free will. God uses everything that happens to bring about our highest good. Now, the problem with that is that we all have perspectives, stories, prejudices about how God should do that. How God should bring good out of everything. And when God doesn't live up to our notion of how God should be doing that, we get agitated and we become afraid. We become fearful. And then the problem, once we become fearful, is nothing good can come out of us. Fear constricts everything, body, mind, and spirit, and soul. So once we're caught in fear, we become part of the problem rather than the solution. Now, you can be tempted by fear, but that's different than giving in to fear. So if we're going to go through this period of history with some degree of sanity, we have to meet God on God's terms. I became friends with an astrologer while I was in India. And the astrologer said, we've been in this cycle for a period of time, and the world's going to be in a difficult cycle for about another 10 years. So it ain't over. And again, we have to get God's perspective on it. Let me just say this. We look at the world and we want it to be a paradise. And there's nothing wrong with that. And we have to work to bring as much of heaven, so to speak, into alignment with planet Earth. But when a saint or sage looks at the world, they don't look at it through that prism of paradise. They look at it as this is a school for transformation. This is a school for growth. And sometimes the transformation and the growth happens in a very easy way. And sometimes it doesn't. C.S. Lewis made this statement. He said, God is wild, you know. Okay? And if God is love, what that means is that love is wild. And sometimes love will work in our lives. God will work in our lives in a way that is gentle and meek and easy, and we flow with it. But sometimes that doesn't work. And in the state of the world right now, that's not really working very well. So God has chosen a different way to work in the world. Wildness. We're in for a wild time, and God's wild love is going to bring good out of it, but in a wild kind of way. I'll say it this way. Love is that force that will do whatever is necessary to evolve us. Whatever is necessary. So with that backdrop, I'll read the Gospel and Yogananda's commentary. And there's two stories within this one story. As they went out from Bethany the next day, Jesus was hungry, and seeing from afar a fig tree with bearing leaves, he went over, seeing whether he could perhaps find something on it. And he found nothing. And speaking out, he said to it, the fig tree, "May no one eat fruit from you again." He cursed the fig tree. I know he wasn't behaving the way we think God should behave. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out all of those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. Now you have to realize that in Jesus' time, Judaism was still centered on the temple in Jerusalem. And the temple, it was believed that God dwelled within the temple in a very unique way, just as Hindus believe God dwells in their temples. And so he would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And as he taught them, he said, "Is it not written, my house will be a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers." The chief priests and the teachers of the law heard this and began looking for a way to kill him, for they feared him because the whole crowd was amazed at his teaching. When evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city, and passing by in the early morning, they saw the fig tree dried up from the roots. And Peter, remembering this, said to Jesus, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree you have cursed has been withered in its roots." And Jesus said to them, "Have faith in God." Let me tell you a little story. Most of you know I went through a divorce when I was 30. And a few years after that, I had this date with this very nice spiritual woman. She happened to be another therapist. And on the first date, we were talking about our spiritual paths. And she said, "I know you do Kriya Yoga, but do you still consider yourself a Christian?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, I don't like Jesus." And I said, "What don't you like about Jesus?" And she quoted this gospel passage. She said, "That's not how a spiritual master should behave." Well, it was the last date we ever had. All right, so let me read Yogananda's commentary. Meekness is not weakness. The meekness of divine personalities is very strong in the infinite power behind their gentleness. They may use this power in a forceful dramatization to admonish those who are stubbornly irresponsive to gentler vibrations. Even as a loving father may resort to firm discipline to deter his child from harmful actions. Divinely guided actions may command extraordinary means to correct a wrong. If Jesus had been motivated by an actual episode of anger, he might have used his divine powers to destroy utterly his detractors. With this little bundle of cords, he could not have seriously hurt anyone. In fact, it was not the whip, but the vibration of colossal spiritual force expressing through his personality that routed the merchants and the money changers. The Spirit of God was with him, a power that was irresistible, causing a throng of able-bodied men to flee before the intensely persuasive vibrations of a single example of meekness. Spirituality abhors, hates spinelessness, One should always have the moral courage and backbone to show strength when the occasion calls for it. All right. So, going back to what I said at the very beginning, God will intervene in human history in different ways. What we're seeing in the gospel stories and Yogananda's commentary is one archetypal way that God intercedes in our personal histories and in our collective histories. Not as punishment, not as shaming, but as a powerful force that will shake things up, loosen things up. And that process is never comfortable, it's uncomfortable. But we have to go through that discomfort so that we can reach a new level of realization, a new level of organization in our individual lives and in our collective lives. That's what's happening in the world today. We're not going to go back to the good old conservative days, and we're not going to go back to the good old liberal days. We're going to go to a new synthesis at some point that will take the best of both and take us beyond them. That's what we're going through. That's this stage of history. Those of you that are part of the 12-step traditions, you know what I'm talking about. You've heard me say this. I used to take people to AA meetings. My first meditation teacher was a recovering alcoholic, and I would go to open meetings with him. And I would often hear this phrase, I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic. And I always thought that that's a contradiction of terms. How can you be grateful and an alcoholic at the same time? And I would talk to people, and they said, because I would hit a bottom, and hitting that bottom, which wasn't comfortable, it cracked open my heart towards God and has given me this unbelievable life that I never thought I would have. That's what the human race is going through. We just haven't hit bottom yet. We're in the process, but we haven't hit bottom yet. So, in that context, let me talk about a primal fear that we all go through in this bottoming process. Now, I can be a bit dramatic, so take my dramatic story in the context of me tending to be dramatic. One of the nights in India when I was at the sickest, in a room, I didn't know that the air conditioners worked, that was hot, I didn't feel well. So I got up and I thought I would throw some water on my face, and I went to the sink and threw water on my face, and a cockroach ran by on the sink. I didn't kill it, I caught it. And I took it outside and released it. But I went back to my bed and I just thought, now this was the drama part of me. Maybe I'm going to die here. And it really was a serious thought. Maybe I'm going to die here. And I didn't like the thought. I'm going to die without Vicky. I'm going to die without you. I'm going to die without my family. I'm going to die without finishing what I think I'm supposed to finish in my life. And so I went into this fear. And I prayed in the midst of the fear. And what came to me is, are you going to trust God even with your death or not? Are you going to trust God even with your death? And it wasn't just a heady thought. It was connecting in my soul. And so my prayer was, okay, if you want to take me now, I don't want to go now, but it's okay. Thy will be done. Not my will, but thy will, as you wish. And then a peace came over me, and I knew it wasn't my time. But this is where I'm going with this. Stay with me. As we go through this transition in history, we're going to face levels of death. So someone in an email yesterday said to me, I'm afraid that America is going to collapse, that this is the end. And I said two things. I don't think so. Yogananda didn't think so. But what if it does? If it does, it's meant to. You have to, if you want to be at peace, you even have to surrender that. You get what I'm saying? Everything has to be surrendered. Think of karma as this, I don't know, a tree with roots. What we're constantly trying to do is trim the branches. What we have to do is cut karma off at its roots. Meaning, everything has to be surrendered to the divine. Everything. Everything. That's how we begin to experience the peace that surpasses understanding. That's how we begin to be taken into a higher state of consciousness. Everything. Now, I'm not suggesting passivity, but we only know how to act once we surrender everything to God and we're operating from peace and love and wisdom. Only then do we know what right action really is. If we want to win the argument, that's not right action. If we can't wait to get the final word in, that's not right action. If we want to give somebody a jab because we're right and they're wrong, that's not right action. We want to condemn the other person, that's not right action. Somebody called me up and said, you know, I'm uncomfortable with what is happening. I'm thinking about writing a letter. Is it okay? And I said, are you coming from truth? And she said, yes. I said, now, are you coming from love? Is your ultimate goal to welcome your errant brother or sister into the beloved community? And she said, yes. I said, write the letter. So I'm not talking about passivity. I'm talking about absolute surrender. And how do we do that? Don't trim the tree up here of karma. Cut it at its roots. God is in charge. God is running the show. And God is going to bring good out of everything in God's time and in God's way. Now, I want to read you a quote from Lahiri Mahashaya. You've probably heard this quote many times. Okay, this is the quote. Solve all of your problems through meditation, meaning listening in silence and stillness. Exchange unprofitable religious speculation for actual God contact. Clear your mind of dogmatic theological debris. Let in the fresh healing waters of direct perception. Attune yourself to the active inner guidance. The divine voice has the answer to every dilemma of life. Solve all of your problems through meditation. Though man's ingenuity for getting himself into trouble appears to be endless, God's grace and blessing is no less resourceful. So let me say what that means on the practical level in the context of everything I'm talking about. If we're going to get what's being said tonight, we're not going to get it at the level of our emotions, first of all. Right now, in the state of the world, our emotions tend to be very reactive. We're not even going to get it at the level of our rational mind. Now, rational thinking is very important. But the rational mind is meant to understand creation, not the creator. So yes, live as rationally as we can be, but at some point the rational mind has to surrender to that which is above it. That's the mind of God. What Lahiri is telling us is go into the silence and the stillness. Surrender everything to God. And then in that silence and stillness, you begin to intuit the very mind of God. And then you see what is happening. You see why it's happening. You know it's serving the highest good, not just in your head, but in your mind and in your heart and your soul. And then you can let go. Then you can relax. And you can trust. And then you become an instrument. Right now, more than anything, I'm not saying we don't do practical things to make a difference. I'm going to get to that in a moment. But right now, more than anything, we have to be people of deep prayer and deep meditation. We have to marry the silence so that we can understand the mind of God. So the mind of God can illumine our minds. So that we understand that in all of this wildness, God is just loving us in a very wild way. And then what Yogananda said, what you experience in meditation, take into practice. Bring that calmness into everything that you're experiencing. And from that calmness, that mind of God will illumine your mind and guide you. One of the things that happened on our trip as we were driving from the Kumbh Mela in Allahabad to Varanasi, it's about a 3-hour car drive. We had 2 drivers, and they took the long route. It took us 8.5 hours to get there. And they wouldn't follow our directions. We gave them our GPS. They wanted to follow their own way. And at one point, we all got out of the car, and everybody was angry with them. I mean, there was a level of calmness. But my whole time, I wasn't in charge of the drivers. I wasn't the one that negotiated the prices. So I kind of just was watching the whole thing. I was praying the whole time. And I got one of the best compliments I ever got. Later on, somebody said to me, "You know, you're a true yogi." And I said, "Well, why do you say that?" "Because you stayed so calm. We wanted to kill the drivers. And you stayed so calm." And I said, "Well, I wasn't in charge. I trusted the person who was in charge. He was German, so I figured he was very efficient. And he knew what he was doing, and he did." And I said, it was all God's will. It's all God's play. Pilgrimages are not meant to be easy. They're meant to be challenging, to take you out of your comfort zone. That's what God's doing with the whole world right now, taking us out of our comfort zone. So, 3 things I'm going to leave us with. The first one is bring that level of calmness into your activity, surrendering everything to God, praying for wisdom and grace and love to know how to interact in the world, in your own world and in other people's worlds. The second thing is, don't know if this is a to-do or just something to kind of, there's a level of to-do-ness in it, but it's very subtle. I want to tell you a story about Father Marian. He's the Catholic priest from Poland who founded the school that Swami supports and the ashram and everything. Well, he was a seminarian at the beginning of the Second World War. He was from Poland, and they rounded up the seminarians and put them in a Dachau concentration camp. He was there for 4.5 to 5 years. Now, the first month or 2 that they were there, they treated the seminarians very well. And they wanted them to sign this paper that they would show to the world of how well they were being treated. And the seminarians had enough courage to say, no, we're not going to sign it. So they got thrown in with everybody else. They did hard labor for 4.5 years. All of the seminarians died except Father Marian. Now, at that moment, you would have said, this is just evil running the show. And at one level, it was. But the wildness of God's love was working through it. When it was all done, the German government gave him some sort of, stipend for what he went through. He could have spent it on himself. He moved to India. First thing he did was start a colony for lepers. They were sleeping under the stars. They had no medical treatment. They were the untouchable of the untouchables. And he loved them. He provided food for them. He built a shelter for them. He got medical care for them. And then their children were not allowed to go to school. So what did he do? He built a school for them. Okay? He started like a soup kitchen in the town. He opened a small hospital medical service. In fact, one of the doctors there treated me for the pink eye. If he'd gone back to his moment in Dachau, he would have said, what's good is going to come out of this? Look at the good that came out of it. And it's multiplying and multiplying. Tom and I saw it with our own eyes, all the good that is happening. Good is going to come out of this. But this is my point. Someone asked him, how did you survive? He said, there were two things. I prayed, meaning I was in communion with God often. And he said, secondly, I never lost hope. Hope is not wishful thinking. Hope is not optimism. It's the willingness to stare into the darkness until the light shines. And then that light sustains us. So we have to choose to be people of hope. We have to have the courage to outstare the darkness in a place of communion with God. And the light will shine more and more brightly within the darkness, and that will sustain us. And that light will then illumine our conscious mind. The last thing I want to say is that we have to do good. Every day, do good. People are not going to remember what we say to them. They're not going to remember the cleverness of our arguments. They're going to remember how we felt, how they felt in our presence, how we made them feel. We want to be a force for good in the world, then we have to do good. And I'll close with this story. We stayed in the Kumbh Mela, there were 500 million people, okay? We stayed in a particular colony that was run by the Saraswati order that Swami and our Swamis are a part of. And the second person in charge of this Saraswati order is a woman. In fact, I invited her to come to the Assisi Institute. I hope she will come. She's a Swami. Satviji is what they call her. She's from America originally. But she told this story, that when she and the head Swami, who was her guru, they decided to build a school for very poor people in their part of India. And she visited the village, and they were extremely poor. And she came back, and she was sobbing to the Swami. And he said, stop it. Your crying isn't going to help. He said, why don't you spend all night, instead of sobbing, planning out how you're going to raise money to help them? And that's what she did. But then she came back, she said, but I had a lot of trauma in my childhood. And she went through years of therapy, appropriately. And so it triggers my trauma. And he said, when are you going to get over that? Do good. And she spent her life doing good. That's what we're called to do. Not cry and complain. I mean, there's times that shed tears. Don't misunderstand me. But let's be about doing good. I'll close with this, and it's very personal. Because it's about us. My favorite place in India was in Varanasi. And there's a temple dedicated to Lahiri Mahashaya, and they have his ashes there. And one of the most sacred places I've ever been. Incredible. But also Babaji visited there and blessed the lingam, and there's a side chapel dedicated to him with a life-size statue of him meditating. And again, I felt his presence indescribable throughout the experience of India. But there was a moment where in my heart, I felt him say, I know you, and I know your work, and it is blessed. He knows us. He knows our work. It's blessed. We have a role in the world to bring light and goodness. And that's how we're to spend the rest of our lives, bringing light and goodness. The divine in me bows in the goodness and light in all of you.